more than 80 countries at COP30 joined call for roadmap to fossil fuel phase out. Countries from Africa, Asia, Latin America, Pacific, and Europe plead for transition to be central outcome of talks. If this sounds familiar, it should, if you followed any of the COPs. I'll read here. More than 80 countries have joined a call for a roadmap to phasing out fossil fuels in a dramatic intervention into stuck negotiations at UN COP30 Climate Summit. Countries from Africa, Asia, Latin America, and the Pacific joined with EU member states and the UK to make an impassioned plea for the, quote, transition away from fossil fuels to be a central outcome of the talks, despite stiff opposition from petrostates and some other major economies. Tina Steg, climate envoy for the Marshall Islands, very important position, flanked by ministers from 20 countries, told a packed press conference in Belém, quote, let's get behind the idea of a fossil fuel roadmap. Let's work together and make it a plan. So it'll go from a roadmap to a plan. I thought it would be the other way around, but I'm not a global bureaucrat. What the hell do I know? Campaigners hailed the intervention. Jasper Inventor, that's his name. Jasper Inventor, Deputy Program Director at Greenpeace International, said, quote, this could be a turning point of COP30. This was a strong signal coming from the global South and global North countries on the need to phase out fossil fuels. They are following the call of 40,000 people on the streets of Belém and millions of people around the world. The presidency of the COP and the rest of the parties have to heed this call. The climate needs it. The people demand it, unquote. A commitment to, quote, transition away from fossil fuels was the key outcome of COP28, held in Dubai in 2023. But several countries, led by Saudi Arabia, subsequently started trying to unpack the resolution. And the climate talks in Baku last year, attempts to follow up and flesh out that resolution, failed. This year, though, the Brazilian host refused to put any mention of the transition away from fossil fuels, unquote, on the official agenda for the conference. It was even excluded from, quote, presidency consultations that have been taking place behind the scenes on the 4 trickiest issues of the agenda. I thank you for your patience in me reading that because I found so much of it so amusing. Craig, as noted in the beginning of this podcast, you were at that COP 2 years ago. You've been to almost all the COPs now for quite a while. But, you know, you see, before, phasing out fossil fuels was a promise, or maybe it was a pledge. It certainly wasn't a roadmap, but it could have been a plan. I mean, gosh, it seems to me the climate alarmists are even tilting at their own windmills. There's like nowhere to go with this.
Oh, and I got to give Lula, he's got himself in a pickle here because not that I feel sorry for him, he's kind of a jerk, but he has some member states that are very dependent on oil. Obviously, the Middle East, and if you look at where the COPs were last year, it was in Baku, Azerbaijan, which is a major oil exporter. In fact, it was really kind of amusing last year when we went to Baku that there's all these oil fields as you go toward the city and where the COP is. And in the middle of the oil fields were welcome to COP 29, which was last year. And the year before that, of course, they had it in the United Arab Emirates, big oil company. Egypt was before that. These are all countries in the Middle East that love it and would have nothing to do with it. They even put their oil ministers in charge as COP leaders of the summit. So now coming to Brazil, Brazil has a lot of offshore oil that it wants to move on. They also want their treaty. In fact, if you look at what they're pushing for down there, they want to see more use of biodiesel. Why? Because next to the United States, Brazil's the second producer of biodiesel. Again, this has little to do with the climate. It's a lot of economic posturing where countries somehow will say they're phasing out fossil fuels, but they're not. I mean, of the 190 countries, you got 80 to go along with this. Where's the rest? This is over 100 other countries that are not going along with this. And I guarantee you, a lot of them are the oil producing or energy producing countries.
I sent you a message, Jim, in the private chat, a link, because your story is behind the times. Just in 2 days, in 24 hours, in fact, that agreement now omits any mention of fossil fuel phase out. 80 countries wanted it. Now it's not in the text of the agreement.
So it ultimately failed. It didn't happen. So yeah,
it failed before it was stillborn. It never came to fruition. Now that they don't have a treaty yet, they'll get something by the end of the conference or days after the conference. They'll go into late negotiations. But in the past, they've always focused on emissions and left it to countries to how to reduce emissions. We all knew it meant getting rid of fossil fuels, but it was directly on emissions. This was going to say, no, it's not a transition. We need to end the use of fossil fuels. And 80 countries were all on board. Now, the UK, which was one of the countries pushing it, says, we won't sign this new treaty if it doesn't mention fossil fuels. So it has collapsed. And look, China was there. It was never going to sign that. It was not one of those 80 countries, despite being the rock star. We aren't there. We were never going to sign it. Russia's not going to sign it. India wasn't going to sign it. A lot of European countries were agreed to sign it, but they've already put themselves in a death spiral with all their EU climate restrictions that are forcing their industries to leave and leaving their people shivering in the dark and complaining of high prices. So that agreement is, for all intents and purposes, dead on arrival. And in part, Trump has played no small role in that, simply because he said, we are not going to commit economic and energy suicide. You can do what you want. We're going to prosper. But other countries are saying, yeah, we want to do some of that prospering ourselves. Australia, I don't know if they were going to sign on to that, but it's funny. They've expanded coal mining, coal use, and natural gas. Even as they say, we're going to keep our Paris Agreement commitments to emissions reductions, even as we're building more fossil fuel infrastructure. China, we promise, we pinky swear that we are going to cap our emissions, even as we build more coal. Look, reality is what it is. The use of fossil fuels is not going away. They can sign an agreement that says it is, but it's not worth the paper it's written on any more than the Paris Agreement was worth the paper it was written on, or the Kyoto Accord was worth the paper it was written on, or the initial UNFCCC Earth Summit Agreement was worth what it was written on. They've had multiple treaties. Not a single of the goals have been met.
And I'll tell you, Sterling, the way that they keep them is the same way that Al Gore would keep them. What the UN is looking for is money. So even if you happen to be a private citizen like Al Gore and you're jet setting around the world, who, by the way, Al Gore was not a big figure here. It was Gavin Newsom. Gone is, Greta Thunberg and all that type of, and Al Gore. Now it's Gavin Newsom. But even if he's jet setting, if he's paying them to have carbon offsets, and similarly, even if you're a country like China and you can exude leadership, or the United States, if we pay enough money, even if our emissions increase, we're being good global citizens and we won't be held. Countries have to put forward what they call NDCs, and they have to do that every 5 years, nationally determined contributions. Who makes a decision on whether a country is keeping in accord with the Paris Accord or not? It's the UN, folks. And I have a feeling if you pay enough money, your NDC as your country will probably be approved, and they'll kind of overlook the fact that your emissions are going up and figure out a way to greenwash your country. Because, just like they greenwash Al Gore and others, if they pay enough money to get carbon offsets, they'll do the same for the America. We fell out of favor, and principally Trump has, because of cutting off the money and the access. Whereas Biden, of course, let it flow, and that's why he's a hero.
Yeah. You inspired me earlier, Craig, when you talked about how a proper welcome to a COP sign should be made. So I asked Grok. To make me a sign. I put in the prompt, make me a picture of the words "Welcome to COP 30" spelled out by lots of little blue flames from natural gas. So there you go.
Nice.
That should be the one that greets everybody.
That's nice. I mean, that has kind of a cold feel to it with the blue and everything. I mean,
yeah.
I would have thought that was ice, but we'll go with flames. I like it.
Not bad for just doing it in 30 seconds. I mean, Linnea, you worked in the petrochemical industry. You need to get one of those for Christmas, I think. That'd be a nice gift.
Yeah, that looks rad. I would put that in front of my house. I don't know if people would Love it. But I don't know if it would go over super well in the dry season, but I might put it out anyway.
Yeah.
They might not even understand it.
Yeah. Let me get this. So there's a second story. Speaking of the money, this is actually pretty, this story also made me smile. Again, from our good friends over at the Communist Guardian, UK. The headline is, well, let's just say that the negotiations, as Sterling pointed out, are not going too great. Headline is, it's like arguing with robots. Negotiators of the state of COP30 talks, 3 representatives of developing countries speak candidly about meetings behind closed doors in Berlin. So, in the negotiating rooms at the COP30 Climate Summit, representatives from vulnerable countries work to get the best deal they can, according to this story. Here, 3 of them reveal what happens behind closed doors. Source number 1 said, we need to be guided by the science, and the science is very clear, but some of them argue against the science. The IPCC has made it very clear that 1.5 Celsius is critical. But you hear in negotiating rooms people opposing the science, saying, oh, there's other science besides IPCC, and, quote, that the IPCC is not, quote, the best available science. Wow, Craig, were you in that room? I don't know. This person, you snuck in there, didn't you? This person also says, this is really distressing to hear them say that. It hurts me. We keep defending it, but they don't listen. They don't want to listen. Here's another sob story from source number 2. When we are in the negotiating rooms, I get very frustrated with the developing countries' positions. We want a tripling of adaptation finance from 40 billion to 100 billion. Developed countries agreed last year at COP29 in Baku to 300 billion by 2035 in climate finance. But that's for everything. It includes adaptation, mitigation, loss and damage funding. A lot more of it should be for adaptation. You can get private sector money for things that make a profit, like clean energy. The banks will give you money for that because they make an investment back. No private sector company will invest in the things that we need for adaptation, like ways to store water from the rains or helping farmers grow different crops. Developed countries don't want to give us the money, but they're supposed to. Under the Paris Agreement, they agreed in Article 9.1 to pay us. We know that we did not create this crisis. They did. But we are the ones who are suffering. And then source number 3, speaking again about the reluctance to pay up $300 billion, says here, some of the most senior Global South negotiators are saying, quote, without a space to discuss this provision, why even come to COP? So, so guys, it's like, just give me the money. Just give us the money. But it appears that the developed world, always really, I think, intended to just virtue signal, but not really pay up, because the payments are always down the line. And the fact that the U.S. is no longer going to participate in this grift under Trump and give them anything, it's either that or they never really believed that the developed world is in actual physical danger because of climate change. And gosh, Tony Heller, it's just all about the money. It's all the grift, isn't it?
Yeah, in 1989, the United Nations said we only had until the year 2000 to save the planet from global warming. So here we are, we're 25 years past the deadline. They're still trying to get money out of people, even though they said it was hopeless 25 years ago. So obviously it's not about the climate, it's about the money, and it always has been. And, going further with what I was saying earlier, I mean, most of my time right now is spent developing AI related software. And I've been following this really closely. The United States stock market is very heavily dependent on the success of US AI hardware and software companies like NVIDIA and OpenAI. And they're competing against Chinese companies who have much lower cost electricity because they're burning coal. So this puts American companies at a huge disadvantage that we've got expensive electricity here. We're not taking advantage of our resources. And if we want to be competitive with China in AI, we're going to have the electricity. And this is a really fundamental issue, and it's why I've been pushing it really hard. Yeah, it is about the money, and a lot of the money right now is in AI hardware and software. and we're going to need this electricity. So the United States needs to ramp up its coal and all of its available energy resources as quickly as possible if we're going to remain competitive with China in the AI wars.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, Craig, you kind of picked that story not on purpose at the time, knowing that you wanted to talk about the money. I mean, you have talked about the money, but just this idea that the so-called developing world keeps putting their hands out for money, but where are the big flotillas of climate refugees? The islands in Oceania are actually, some of them are gaining, a lot of them are gaining land. They're not being subsumed by the oceans, and so it's kind of hard to pay out for nothing because nothing is happening.
Well, and that's just it. You'll find when you talk to the island nations, and I've done that on several of these COPs, because they tend to be shills for the Greens. The Greens must have some real influence in Tuvalu and places like that. Maybe that's where they vacation. But when you talk to them, their big deal is that, our island's sinking. I go, wow, well, it's all these greenhouse emissions that are causing it to sink, right? And I go, oh, yeah. And I go like, well, most of them are coming from China. Yeah, we don't care about China. I go, well, wait, if you're worried about greenhouse emissions, you should be worried about China. No, they know China's not going to give them a dime. They're worried about our emissions, even if they're less, because they know the U.S. could pay them something. That's exactly what it comes down to. Their selective outrage kind of betrays them. And you talk to them personally. We had a chance, Mark Morano and I did, we were like talking to people from Pakistan, the United Arab Emirates. We went to a few African countries and talked to the delegates. They would actually do well on this show. They wouldn't actually doubt much of what we're talking about. They would say, oh yeah, they're kind of crazy in the climate stuff and that. Why are they signing on when you see some of these agreements and stuff dealing with the Paris Accords and whatnot? It's about the money. They look at this as economic opportunity, not realizing this welfare payment may well come with strings attached to it and may actually impinge on their sovereignty because the UN's kind of call the shots, but they look at it as money. Plus, it's a pretty good vacation. You get to go to places like the Brazilian rainforest and, Istanbul or Kyoto and all that sort of thing. So I think a lot of these delegates are privately with us. But publicly, right after we're done talking to them, and they'll actually share some of the things that they think are alarmist, they'll come out and say everything as though they're a shill for Al Gore and everything publicly. It's really bizarre world when you're there.
No offense, but it sounds like some fucking commie gobbledygook.
I want to go back to the article, how it began. I won't talk about the money. Tony and Craig have talked about the money. They said they follow the science. It was about the science. They need the money because the science says they're going to be destroyed. And we can't give up on 1.5. And the UN supports that. The UN has already said 1.5 is out of reach. The UN doesn't support that. And it was never 1.5, 2.0. They were never built on science. Those were political goals, political decisions. Who says so? Well, the people who negotiated says, well, yeah, it was just a decision that we made. We had to set the target somewhere, but it has no scientific backing that shows there's some kind of tipping point if we reach 1.5. And if there was, we're in trouble because we're past it. Just like we're past all those deadlines for New York being underwater. The end of, AOC said the end of the world by 2020. All of the goals, all the deadlines that they've set, all the tipping points that they've said are tipping points, we've been past them or are we fast approaching them? None of the disasters have come. That's the science. Science is data, not climate models, not pronouncements from on high at UN conferences. And the data doesn't support the claim that anyone's following the science at the UN.
Now, it's information like that you're saying, Sterling, which is why they passed another declaration in the conference called the Declaration on Information Integrity, and why this climate realism show may well be off the air if United States phones, joins under a President, Newsom down the road. 12 countries, of course, signed this, and Gutierrez got up on a public stand saying that what's stopping them from achieving their goal is climate denialists that are controlling the algorithms. So they're going to pressure some of the major tech companies to start
controlling the algorithms.
Yes, it's you. You're
Bring it
controlling
up.
the algorithms. I talk about projectionism. I think a psychologist would call it that, where you're accusing the others of what you're doing. And while you may take this, the U.S. of course didn't sign. Canada did to the north of us, as did some European nations. They're putting $100 million into this to be able to try to shut up, Tony Heller and Sterling and James Taylor and Linnea and all the people out there. So you guys are the ones, according to Gutierrez, that are stopping, any good thing from being done.
So you're saying when we have a President Newsom, that this will all change. My suspicion is, look, 100 million to me, a lot of money. I'll take it. Probably, to anyone on this call, 100 million, man, we're swimming in it. 100 million compared to all the AI, all the bots, all the search engines, all the big tech guys, it's beneath their margin of error at the bank.
Good point. But they do want to investigate your donors, and they may want to pull your tax status. So that's another thing they discuss there too. That could be more painful.
Yeah.
So they are talking hardball against climate denialists, of which everybody here would have a big X on us. I'm sure.
Tony, jump in here.
Yeah, I've been self-funded the whole time, which is why I've been able to do this. But I've lost jobs, I've lost contracts. I work for a very large tech company who walked me out the door out the day after I attended a EU climate conference in 2011. They wanted to promote themselves as being a green company, and I didn't fit the bill after doing that, so they walked me out the door. I've been there for many years, and I've lost contracts, and people found out who I was. But fortunately, I've been able to self-fund myself, and also through donations on my blog to keep me going. So yeah, it's a huge problem, and it's something I've been fighting all along. I was kicked off Twitter, I've been kicked off YouTube, suspended from YouTube several times. So it's an ongoing campaign of pressure to shut down people presenting contrary information to their propaganda.
Yeah. I mean, you reminded me. I've known you for a long time, Tony, and I've known but you wrote under a nom de plume for many years. You were not out there as Tony Heller publicly.
Yeah, I had to. The company that I was working for, had I written under my own name, they would have walked me out the door then instead of in 2011. so I had no choice. Eventually, I switched over to my name, but I've probably lost millions of dollars in opportunity cost because I'm doing this, which is fine because I want to do the right thing and I enjoy doing what I'm doing. I've made a lot of friends, but yeah, there's a real cost to going up against these people.
Right. Well, I guess we're in the interregnum right now because the rule has always been suppression and not free speech. So